or this morning's, or at this evening's, depending upon where you are on the planet, Evolution Hour. If I can remember where to point to, there we go. Boop, boop, boop. Yeah, there we go. Our wonderful patrons who keep us going week after week, month after month. Thank you very much. We are semi-worthy about that. And as usual, we have the exciting, ongoing world of replacing Darwin. He actually has another source on the ongoing listen of homozygous versus heterozygous mutations. And remember, Jensen's argument is that because mutations are occurring in one form rather than another in a population, that this somehow shows that speciation is slowing down as a way to have speciation really, really fast in the previous time, and that he can compress all of that successfully, so long as you're stepping over most of the data. So this one, he just dangles a source on penguins. And it was a 2014 paper from Lee. In fact, that's deliciously available open access, which we'll be putting the link into. And where they were dealing with not only the penguins, but their related organisms, the birds, which date back tens of millions of years. And so they're able to, hi, Barbara, they're able to trace the genetic mix of penguins. Now, remember, penguins live in Antarctica pretty much and around the southern hemisphere in various locations. The particular Adelie penguins, I think he's got them on Antarctica. How did they get there? Remember, all the bird kinds were on board the ark. So where were they before the flood? And how did they get from wherever the ark landed down to their current distribution? That's a biogeographical issue that not discussed whatsoever, in addition to all the genetic information in there. It'd be really neat if the creationists, when they bring up a technical paper, focus on the content of that paper. And if he wants to make a really whiz-bang argument, make it, but not try to slip it in footnote after footnote after footnote, the tiny little sliver of information pulled out without dealing with all the other context of that information. And that's an arguable reason why the creationist movement's never going to make any headway on anything. The other element that I was into had to do with a thing that relates to the new Rocks Were There Volume 2 that will be coming up. Tim Clary did a post in 2020 on the ancient Sahara was wetter than expected. And this is not exactly a news bulletin if you're aware of paleoclimate, the fact that the current Sahara Desert is a relatively recent phenomenon. In fact, the Nile area where the pyramids are in ancient Egypt was much wetter even within the times of pre-dynastic times, and even when they were building the pyramids, wasn't as dry as it was subsequently. All of which is really sweet, except it's not really helping the creationist case. So anyway, he tries to take this damp Sahara notion from a paper from Van Neer, Aquatic Fauna from the Takarakori Rock Shelter Reveals the Holocene Central Saharan Climate and Paleohydrogeography. That's another open access paper. And one might notice the chronology of the time frames we're talking about, which is the late Pastoral is about 5,000 years before the present. That's 1,000 years before the Earth was created, according to young Earth creationism. And they eventually, it goes all the way back to 8,900 years before present, 6,000 years. So it's just a chronology that has detailed stratification information that blows away. The entire sequence, for all practical purposes, is pre-flood. And yet it's supposedly like maybe post-flood. So you can compare the two. its actual age of about 10,000 years down to 4,650 years ago. In the ICR model, all that's got to be in the Ice Age, which they think was, quote, possible 3,000 to 4,000 years ago. That's 1,000 BC to 2,000 BC. In other words, a few centuries after the supposed big slosh over a time frame of about 1,000 years. This little issue about how the creationist model of post-flood environment is just hilariously implausible, especially when they try to connect it up with actual cultures. Remember that the kinds of material that's being talked about with this rock shelter is pre-dynastic. And yet all of that has to actually be moved out post-flood, along with the pyramids and everything else that potentially connects up to it and all the cultures that would relate to that. It's an absolute hilarious can of worms, of which Tim Clary doesn't seem to have the faintest idea that any of those connections are in fact there. Finally, I'm seeing the darkness at the end of the tunnel on going through the back issues of Acts and Facts. I'm now down to late 2022. And at that point, once I'm through all of that and I'm caught up to speed on that, then I can finish off the Armitage section of the Big Slosh chapter on soft tissue, and then launch into sorting out all my material and presenting all the stuff on the cosmology chapter, which Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Stars, which are the two big sections that Jackson wanted me to do for the book. And this has ballooned to the point where we're also going to be having the big appendix on the Ark Encounters, creation kinds, of which stuff like this connects up directly to it, because how many kinds are there? And can they relate, in fact, to the extant organisms, independent even of the biogeographical issue? It's going to be funky to kind of see how they structure stuff together. One of the areas that I'm most interested in is to see why the listing at the Ark Encounter is organized the way it is, because it's not in alphabetical order. Remember, the kinds are all independent in their model. So why are they not alphabetical? Why are they structured to mammal groups and reptile groups and dinosaur groups and mammal-like reptile groups and frogs and so forth? But even within that, why are they organized in the order that they are, which again is not alphabetical? And what I'm suspecting is that they've gone through the regular systematics on Wikipedia and just organized things in the sequence that you would find them on that. So we'll be testing that a model out as to why they're organized and structured the way they are. Then there's going to be the chapters Jackson's going to be focusing on. We're going to be having stuff on, of course, human evolution, the origin of tetrapods, whales, which is a delicious little area. And there's a whole bunch of stuff that connects up all to that. And the big puzzle that I'll be having is, as we've been presenting, we're going to be having stuff on paleo environments, plate movements, Rodinia versus Pangea, and all that kind of stuff as there as well. And that will afford the opportunity to insert a great deal of information in relation to the geology. Steve Bauman, you're going to be into that. It's because they ain't scientists. Yeah, that's kind of how it boils down. Well, no, to be fair though, Tim Clary supposedly has a PhD, and Andrew Snelling and the other various gangs that pop up at ICR and also at Answers in Genesis and CMI. And so that's what we have to say, is that they're not very good scientists. They're good at apologetics. They got that down. By the way, there's another thing that's coming up. I got a notice from CMI that one of their little minions, lower echelon guy, so far down that I only have one argument on Bible apologetics that he co-authored back in like 2016, this guy Gillis, who's apparently coming to Rathdrum, Idaho, which is in the state over and within quickie driving distance, to lecture on creationism at a little church. It's going to be like a 2-day kind of a thing. And the second day one, which hopefully Jim Hudlow from the Inland Northwest Free Thought Society and I can schmooze over there, because it's open to the public, free, on dinosaurs and fossils. Well, I'm kind of interested in dinosaurs. I'm kind of interested in fossils. As anybody who's ever wandered around my basement will see when they can see all the collections of various dinosaur models and the books on dinosaurs down below and all that sort of stuff. And of course, I pay close attention to that. It's an area that I've been fascinated with on its own interest, independent of any connections to creation science. And so I'll be very interested to see how informed Gillis thinks he is on dinosaurs. I would be gobsmacked if he doesn't bring up the soft tissue issue, which of course fresh in my mind because of Rocks Were There Volume 2. And then it'd be interesting to see how big of an audience they've got, how many of those do they consider themselves well versed in creationism, and if so, based on what? I guess there's supposed to be some CMI material that's available that will be presented in that, which I'll be intrigued to see how much of it I'm familiar with. And with Jim Hudlow and I together at the thing, we can do a little frickin' frack routine there where we can be like, oh, look at that little book there. You remember when so-and-so got this completely wrong and all. So we'll see what's going on in there. So it should be kind of intriguing just to kind of a sense of what a small grassroots church in an area that's a very politically conservative state, what kind of knowledge they think they have. And there may also be a few members in the church, who are skeptics, or, they still may be coming from a Christian framework, but they might be wondering whether all this young earth creationist stuff is all it's cracked up to be. One encounters that every once in a while. And so I'm open one way or the other to see how exactly that's going on. And I'll be taking notes in that. And if it doesn't end up directly being discussed in Rocks Were There, it'll certainly be grist for a future book that I have planned down the line, which is to take the material that I had started to accumulate on the education issue and how the creationist movement has moved into trying to get things on the education front. And generally speaking, not very successfully, except bottom up with individual teachers presenting material. But the idea of getting infiltrated to the point where the government or state boards would be favoring those positions, it's never happened. And even in the Trump era, there was no movement into that area. Abortion, of course, was the thing that they were particularly eye-twitchy about, and focusing on the courts. And as we saw with the Dobbs ruling and that, they got what they wanted. But there hasn't been a move to stick anti-evolution material. Now, what is intriguing, given the revisionist nature of the Dobbs ruling, that where they basically flushed down the toilet 40 years of operation, the rulings that you can't teach creation science in the schools are about a decade later from Roe v. Wade. So if you find somebody on their justice, the late Justice Scalia, who was replaced by Kavanaugh, I think, that bunch could theoretically decide to dust off Scalia's dissent on Edwards v. Aguilar in the same way that Alito's dissent on the Roe v. Wade position gets dusted off and gets to be a ruling. So don't count your anti-evolution opposition chickens until they actually can hatch and see what happens at a various legislative level. It's just is that it is intriguing demographically that this has not been a cutting edge issue in the apologetics area. They were just too fixated on abortion to bother about the little flickering candle of Darwin being taught in the schools. But I for a moment don't think that that's completely gone away in their sensibilities. So there'll be a lot to learn from what's going on at the little Rathdrum area. And it's just like Jim Jordan, who is one of the stupider members of Congress, not quite as idiotic as Marjorie Taylor Greene and wackaloon George Santos, that level. But he is pretty bad. And he lobbed a piece just today on, or no, I think it was yesterday, on a post from the Federalist Society, talking about their efforts to get parental choice in the schools. the schools. They're really keen on that. And this turned out to be a name I hadn't encountered before. But when I got down to the affiliations, it goes ka-ching, because the lady in question is a fellow at the Discovery Institute. So that directly links up the apologetic frame that Jim Jordan is doing with what's going on at the Discovery Institute and their connections to all of this. Now, the extent to which she apparently has offered absolutely no information on Darwinism or anti-evolutionism. But remember, the Discovery Institute has more little bags on their baggage cart than just their anti-evolutionism. Before they had that, they were always on small government fiscal conservatism. Michael Behe first showed up at the Discovery Institute back before Darwin on trial, Darwin's Black Box came out, going on about how he would want to see Social Security privatized and all that. So there's this conventional conservatism, and the founder of the Discovery Institute has. He tried to get to be governor several times, I think, unsuccessfully. And his political conservatism fits in with that framework as well. So it didn't entirely surprise me that this Federalist Society person is also cross-connected with the Discovery Institute. They've got a lot of interconnected people. In terms of the inroads that the Discovery Institute wanted to make into the sciences and culture, they've been a dismal failure, and will be at one point or another wanting to allude to Joel Duff and others who have pointed out that we are now at a point in the wedge document mythology that we should have seen the revolution happening by now in terms of the transformation of society in the favor of intelligent design and the Christian evangelical narrative that goes along with it. Their framework as to when they thought they would be really making serious inroads in the sciences was like for the early 2000s. And so by the 2015 era or so forth, they were fully anticipating big things. Well, no. And if anything, they're kind of just wheels spinning over there at the Discovery Institute, incestuously cross-currenting things. I was just checking on some information of where, to show you the linkages. Randy Guglielmo at ICR is drawing on Richard Weikert and John West from the Discovery Institute, complaining about these culture camp issues and about violence on the streets and all of that stuff. Somehow they managed to miss January 6th and any Christian nationalists. They don't even like the idea of there being Christian nationalists. It's all got to be Darwinists that are the cause of problems. And David Klinghoffer was one of these things. So this is an incestuous loop of Weikert, West, Klinghoffer at the Discovery Institute banging this drum, and then getting sucked off from an Institute for Creation Research, Young Earth Creationist. Now move over to the Young Earth Creationist frame, and now you have a group that's also looking like it may be running out of steam. That there are fewer and fewer active writers involved in their issues of Acts and Facts. It's just a smaller and smaller club. You've got this little sidebar area of the new creationists. And by the way, I think Answers in Genesis has just started to dump on Kurt Wise and others for being compromisers because they're letting too much evolution into the mix, forgetting the fact that that's implicit in the whole problem of trying to deal with the double whammy creation week and then the flood big slosh speciation resets. This is an inevitable problem they were going to be dealing with. And so to see some of the creationist apologetics realizing, the area where we have to go is an area that we don't want to go because we really want to keep that evolution free thing. In the same way, one of the hobby horses that will be noted in Rocks for Their Volume 2 is Randy Guglielmo's obsessive distaste for natural selection, to the point of where he's tried to replace it completely with this CET model, a continuous, not adaptive, but environmental tracking, continuous environmental tracking, which is a mess. Various people, Dapper Dino and Joel Duff and others have pointed out, and Dan Stern Cardinale have from various directions pointed out that no, even the material they're citing as technical literature and trying to bend it into this isn't going to be working. So there's a whole bunch of delicious little trends that are going on that I'll be seeing play out. And by the time I get down to doing this book that I tentatively want to call Kulturkampf, because it's about the anti-evolution culture war and their desires to remake society and to grab the educational system to do it, it's looking like there's big problems for their apologetic impact. Now, whether that's continuing to be the case over the next 10, 15 years, we'll find out. By that time, I'll have finished these various other books and I'll be able to collate all that material together, and a lot of dust gets to be settled as to which characters are going on and how elections have gone and all that sort of stuff. So anyway, it'll be an interesting little subject matter. It was part of the stuff that was in the tips modules 6 and 7. And there was a planned 8th module that was going to be on the education issue. And that kind of got shunted aside when I started working on the books in order to generate revenue to keep me alive. And the fact that Jackson and I have so many delicious little projects afoot that it just changed the focus on things. But all the material that I wanted to have out there in one form or another, whether it's on an internet form or eventually as a book form, I want it to be available so people can actually make use of it and see larger perspectives. So anyway, there's the big picture of what's going on. And we're getting kind of a cold snap here in Spokane where the temperatures have dropped down. Fortunately, we didn't get a hell of a lot of snow. So all we have to worry about is freezing the butt off when you're outside or slipping on ice, because the little bits, it warms up and then it freezes again and you get these little ice. There's little patches of ice out in my driveway that I got to watch out about, read carefully to go not do a if I get out there. And then hopefully in another week or so, the temperatures will be warming back up again. We'll be in a little bit more seasonal climate. Who knows what's going on in the rest of things. Welcome to the 21st century. So anyway, that's the main skivvy on things. I'll probably want to give you a post-it on in February once we get around and take a look at this little thing over at Rathdrum. And again, I'll be keeping you posted during the weeks of a lot of little blips of information that I've been acquiring from going through the Acts and Facts stuff. Answers in Genesis is a little bit different operation. It has currently 9 degrees. Yeah, and plus we've got a lot of wind chill here, which has been kind of a mess. That if you happen to be out in it, make sure you get bundled up and all that character. Then come inside and have a nice little hot chocolate or something to warm yourself up with. Anyway, the neat thing is that there's enough capacity on looking through these works. Whenever around 2013, I retooled the TIP project to start paying more attention to the direct technical citations that anti-evolutionists were doing, instead of merely the focused points. So what you're seeing in the various discussions that I have in the part 2 parts, where you're looking at the technical citation and seeing where they're leading astray. The stuff on Jensen and the earlier stuff that I did with the Rupin Sanford book is more in the line of where I've been shifting TIP over to, where it's not merely looking at the salient mistakes that they're drawing on technical papers, but everything they cite that's a technical paper, so that I can then measure that out. And we're still running along in the range of about under 7,000 technical papers that have been cited in the anti-evolution literature. I'm sure the number will eventually reach that level, but it's still a small chunk compared to the actual material. And as you can see week after week from looking at Jensen's book, he's at the same level of misrepresentation that Rupp and Sanford did, which is over 50% of the technical papers that they're citing, they're misrepresenting. Now, there's misrepresentations in different ways between those two books, because Rupp and Sanford tended to be, and for all practical purposes, it was Rupp, because Sanford apparently didn't contribute much to it, according to his own description. But Rupp stuff is largely authority quoting. And so it's a matter of why they picks that little snippet and why not the stuff right after it that is relevant information that contradicts the young Earth creationist timeline. Since that's a book about evolution, human evolution, big chunks of that will be alluding to in the human evolution chapter of Rocks Were There, Volume 2. The Jensen stuff that I've been dealing with for these last weeks, a big chunk of that's going to be relating to that Answers in Genesis Ark Encounter kind list, to contrast the kind list that they do with the implied kind structure that Jensen is offering in his book. So that kind of gets the skivvy about where the project's going and how the book and that is going to be structured around. And I'm expecting it to be just as thick as Volume 1. I suspect the religion book that we're planning on doing in due course also will end up being a 2-volume work. I think we might be able to get away with a single volume for the conspiracy thinking bad methodology book. Everybody's in on it is the tentative title. That will relate to everything from anti-vaxxers to flat earth and all that, which is applied source methodology, and just look at it with two variables. One is just how Looney Tunes the belief is on one axis, and how influential is that belief on another axis. And so we'll be looking at things that are just harebrained screwball, like the flat earth movement being almost the Mount Olympus of dumb for the 21st century, but how they have very little actual impact upon culture. You find once in a while some celebrity jumps on the flat earth bandwagon and you just go, but anti-vaxxer subculture, which is less obviously pseudoscientific, but from a methods point of view, you can see how completely insular it is and how they rely upon a very small network of apologists. The major COVID complainants, there's only about like a dozen people that were then metastasizing. Everybody would be copying, and the Facebook pages and stuff would be riffing off of them, and Twitter and these various others. And Merkele, one of those, still has a big presence on the Epoch Times website, which is that Falun Gong hyper-conservative group. It's kind of, it makes the Washington Times seem liberal. Let's kind of put it that way. That's the Mooney group, Unification Church, originally started that. So that gives you some of the superstructure of what will be going on. And that means that so long as I can operate week by week, month by month, year by year, and not get struck by an asteroid or rampaging gazelles or nutballs, I'm going to stay a busy little beaver, and also doing more paralogs of fog novels and that as well. So it keeps my mind honed, and the work is going, because my curiosity about things just keeps expanding as the amount of technical literature goes on. Probably the biggest learning curve for me has been the cosmology chapter, because although I paid attention to aspects of Big Bang cosmology and things about stellar fusion and how nucleosynthesis occurs inside of stars, and elements about the exploration of the solar system and how creationist arguments fall into that area, I wasn't basically diving into the technical literature at the level that needs to be done in order to be able to put into high relief how the creationists are gumming things up. And again, there's a relatively small number of people that are active there. You've got Jason Lyle, you've got Jake Hebert, and Russell Humphreys, and a few others going on. Oh, and oh gosh, his name starts with a Harkness. That's another area in that. So it's a relatively small field, and spoiler alert, they're having absolutely zero impact on the regular cosmological field, of which if you want to kind of get a sense of what that is, if you encounter Ross apologetics, because he's an astrophysicist and old Earth creationist, he'll siphon that material in fairly straightforwardly. And the intelligent design movement, after all, pulls a lot of the anthropic sides of the universe, which is knee deep in conventional cosmology and an acceptance of the Big Bang as the starting point of the universe, creation ex nihilo, and all that sort. So you've got a funky battle that intrinsically goes on between old Earth creationist intelligent design camp and the young Earth creationists who are just digging in their heels and dismissing the Big Bang evidence constantly. I think eventually there's going to be, what we haven't seen yet properly is to find a pure articulation of a young Earth creationist position that allows for all the Big Bang stuff at the same time that they scrunch everything down. To some extent, the issue that you find about the speed of light speeding up and the stretching out of the heavens metaphor that pops up in some of the Bible that is used as a thing about cosmic inflation and all of that. You could probably find some that's going to figure out how to wrangle that in there and still retain this thing in the same way that the Kurt Wise types are able to put in hyperspeciation and still think that they've got the young Earth creationist things fitting down. But then they run the risk of stepping on the toes of doctrinal purists, because it's difficult to spend all of your time over decades complaining about idea X and then gear shift and say, oh, X is actually right and it's okay. And that's why it was such a shocker to see a short-necked giraffe as the kind in the Ark Encounter when the creationists of Henry Morse and Duane Gish era had been dumping on the idea that it was impossible for a giraffe to have evolved from a short neck form. And yet now you have Answers in Genesis putting that very thing in. So everybody out there that has a discipline and a speciality, pay attention to potential goalpost movings on particular areas, and particularly in the younger generation of creationists, many of whom have just started to dip their little toes in. Some of them do stuff online rather than through the approved ICR AIG thing, in part because AIG and ICR have such a rigid ideology to defend. You're never going to find some creationist writing a paper allowing for natural selection now and appearing at ICR, because Guliuza doesn't like natural selection. So it's got to fit the CET model. So all of that's going to be a matter of seeing how these infightings and turf wars continue as we move through the 21st century. So anyway, I think that probably covers things. We've been on a good thing. We got a good half hour in. Any questions? Barbara, looks like you're the only one in the chat overlay. We'll maybe get some stuff in due course. Everybody stay safe. If you're in a space where you got icky cold weather, or you're worrying about tornadoes hitting you, or any of these other problems that we can have, hunker down and be safe, and we will see you next week. And don't accept any wooden penguins. Penguins, that relates. I was talking about penguins earlier, wasn't I? Yeah, okay. But not one wooden penguin in that technical paper. Okie doke.